First of all, I think we need to separate pure tech companies and companies which are
seriously in tech.
Well, Google is pure tech in my view. Yeah. Whereas Grab, for example, right? Is Grab ComfortDelGro a version of ComfortDelGro that's using a lot more tech? For instance, this one I don't know, right? I mean, debatable. Right?
To Wise and Shine. I'm your host Reggie, aka your Chief Financial Coconut.
And I'm Dawn, SG Budget Babe. Today we are going to talk about a really important topic for next year. It's probably something that many of you have been wondering about, and that is how will the career landscape look like as we move into 2024?
Not very exciting, but very important.
Yeah, it's exciting because if you want to make a career move, that's where the excitement comes in, right? We have, of course, two good guests to help us deep dive into that topic, and they're none other than...
Oh, hi guys, I'm Puay Lim. I'm Commercial Director at Glints. Glints, if everyone is aware, we're a Singapore headquartered regional venture-backed HR business.
And of course, Rakaesh here from the TFC team.
Nice. Yeah, so let's roll, right? What is, maybe ask the expert, right? The commercial director. Right?
Not expert, but
no,
please,
not expert, okay. But essentially he will have a sense of like who is buying his services, right? So he kind of know who are hiring, which sector is growing and all that jazz, right? So I think Singaporeans care about it. Maybe you want to just kind of walk us through a little bit what's happening in the landscape.
I think the truth is this year hasn't been the normal year that we've been more used to in the last few years. It's been a bit of a slowdown. I think everyone can read the headlines in the news. The macros are a bit uncertain, and there's a lot of stuff that's going on in different parts of the world, Europe, and the more recent one in the Middle East. And then the interest rate environment, everyone can see it's been going up, and there's a lot of speculation as to when it's going to come down. If you look a little bit ahead into 2024, everyone knows the big event, of course, is the US presidential elections. That's not till the end of next year. And what tends to be the pattern is that the macros don't recover or don't turn around until after the elections. It doesn't really matter, in my view, about who actually wins from that perspective. Of course, it matters in a lot of different other dimensions and aspects, but from a economy perspective, usually what people look for is certainty, right? So after the elections, there will be certainty, and then there will be more likelihood a recovery or rebound in the sentiment. And sentiment is a very important thing when it comes to the job market, because businesses really hire when they feel good and they feel positive.
So it's not technical.
Yeah. Of course, there's technical. Technicals always are what people think drives sentiment, right? But sentiment is also based on a lot of other variables like perception and emotions and whatnot, right? So sentiment is very important. So right now, for example, this year, you can actually say the economy is not in a recession, but the sentiment is uncertain. That's why hiring activity is a bit more unstable this year. But next year, you look at the outlook, then maybe end of next year, I think we expect things to get a bit better. Yeah.
I mean, I can attest to that, right? Like as being in sales, everyone has said budget cut, right? Unable to grow here, unable to grow. And then everything trickles downwards, right? Yeah. And it's the one that I'm getting, and you talked a lot about sentiment, is the fact that they expect something to be uncertain. Yeah. That's what I've been getting in my day-to-day. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it has happened, but they want to save for a rainy day. And I guess that translates to the job market and so on and so forth.
But that's also a very high level and very broad view, almost like motherhood statement, right? Yeah. So if you go one level down, right, you got to look at the texture. So it's also not homogeneous. Not every single company is not hiring. Not every single job is not in demand. So maybe a more interesting and more insightful answer is when you look a little bit ahead, which companies are still hiring, which jobs are still in demand. If this year is anything to go by, I think the first one, I think where jobs are in demand, of course, I think actually revenue generating, so sales, marketing, business development jobs are doing quite well still. Why? Because in uncertainty, businesses actually still have to make money, right? And then in fact have to make even more money than ever. So I think there's a bit of kind of a re-emphasis on those roles. The ones which are not directly connected to revenue generation, so tech jobs, for example, were very, very hot the last few years. That's kind of slowed down a bit more. And sales and marketing jobs, actually, I do expect them going to 24 still being quite hot. Types of companies, I think tech winter. So tech startups, I think
I
are
work at a
spread.
tech company, so a bit stressed.
Yes.
A bit stressed.
Don't I know it?
So I think tech winter is real. I think
Are
this
your friends losing jobs?
Yes.
More and more people.
Yeah, it's very cutthroat in the tech
cutthroat, right.
industry as far as we know. lah.
Yeah. And then within the tech industry, of course, startups are always this very big buzzy thing, right? But they are not really hiring, not moving as much. But again, if you go even deeper, again, not all startups are not hiring. So I think also quite selective. So I think earlier stage startups actually still getting some funding. The later stage ones under a lot more profit pressure. Then less so this year. I think this will continue again going into next year until the interest rate environment changes. Startups are very, very susceptible to the interest rate environment.
They cannot take corporate loans to grow. It's crazy.
It's less about corporate loans actually. It's about venture capital. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Because if they go to the banks, they will take like 9, 10, 12%. Which is crazy. You can't grow at that kind of numbers, right? So everyone is based on VC money, and if there's not enough VC money slushing around, then there's not enough jobs,
Yeah.
right? At least in the startup.
The VCs actually have the funds, lah. It's just that they're being a lot more selective about how they deploy. So as a result, money the tap doesn't open as easily, doesn't flow as easily. So startups then downstream effect is their hiring is a lot more constrained. On the flip side, of course, then the large corporates actually are still quite resilient. I think a lot of more business as usual. They still have to run their business. They still have to do their projects. So the continuing hiring patterns will still be there. Yeah.
Earlier on, you talk about there is a slowdown this year that you've generally seen. How does that slowdown in terms of data and numbers look like compared to like the year before? And are you starting to see some indicative numbers for next year already based on the gigs and the contracts that you all have won?
I think I'm in the recruitment business, right? So maybe a first indicator I can give when numbers are concerned is how recruitment businesses have been performing. And this is not Glints ourselves only. I mean, this is broadly many of the recruitment agencies I'm aware of, our peers and our competitors. I think on a broad stroke, you can say most recruitment businesses are between -20% to -50% down year on year this year against last year's performance.
And that's coming off the highs of the pandemic, right?
Correct. Yeah, correct. And then depending on how exposed they are to the tech winter is how jialat or how big the negative is. A lot of businesses really thrive on especially that boom time of working for venture-backed tech businesses on filling technology jobs and roles. And that was a very, very good business. But today that's quietened down a lot.
Let's get a little bit more specific on like the big companies, right? Because essentially the broad stroke is a lot of startups are struggling, blah, blah, blah. So that's the end of the discussion. Okay, that's it, right? But I think a lot of Singaporeans do work for very big MNCs. They also work for a lot of government jobs, right? So what is the landscape there? Like maybe give us a bit more color. Like which sector looks a bit more interesting, looks a bit sexier, looks like they're going to hire more so that you can jump over and make more, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I think I know we walk away from startups, but let's not walk away from tech. Okay. Because tech, another very big buzzword that's come out is of course AI, right?
Yes.
Especially generative AI, right? So AI is, I think, it's not just a buzzy trend word. It is that to an extent, and there's certain frothiness to it at some layers and some types of companies.
Hype trends,
as with
right?
all hype.
Yeah.
But there's also some very real foundational things that's being done, especially at the what's called the foundation layer of AI, which is the LLMs, the large language models and whatnot, right? So the hardware and the software companies involved in that layer of work, I think that actually is a boom time. So you can see, on the hardware side, you've got the chipset makers, right? The GPU graphic processing.
NVIDIA has been doing pretty well this year.
Amazing, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a big example. And then if you read also what's happening in and around Singapore, right? Singapore is also making certain shifts to accommodate the AI trends. I think there was just a government release just about a few days ago, just precisely on that, a framework of rules to facilitate that. I think that will be here to stay, at least for next year for sure. So that would be a big theme. And all the adjacent and downstream things around AI, which is of course data, for example, or data infrastructure, right?
Are you seeing for these AI roles, right? Are they more like really tech companies hiring for it? Or are you also starting to see some of the older school kind of industries?
Absolutely. It's not just the pure tech guys, right? Traditional industries and whatnot are all having to sit up and pay attention and ask themselves, how does this change the way we work? And therefore, what type of requirements and skill sets do we need to have in the team? One very, very simple job that's emerged out of all this, for example, is prompt engineering. Right? What is prompt engineering? Is simply, do you know how to educate and ask the question in the right way to ChatGPT, for instance.
Is
Right?
ChatGPT the only tool that they're asking for in these
No,
prompt
absolutely
engineers
not.
right now?
No, absolutely not. So there's all manners of tools available right now, right? Built on top of, again, the different foundational layer models. I think that's a very, very big theme. I think other very big macro themes and therefore industry verticals that are now interesting. I think green is a very big buzzy thing. I think in and around the region, I think where Singapore is concerned, you would see that there are adjacent countries around us which are positioning for to be the battery layer for greener energy. There is themes around greener mobility. So there's things like electric vehicles, EV. Is going to come up. Singapore is in the heart and center of a lot of these things, so it will be a beneficiary of these movements. So I think green is quite big. I think health is also another one. Truth be told, I think health is an industry where there's still a lot of very old school enterprises which are operating in this space. Digitization, digital transformation in what is a very, very fragmented and very old school way of setting up IT infra and all that, right? That is something that they're trying to change. A lot of players are trying to look at it both on the public side and also on the private side. So I think that will also be...
So they're hiring for transformation roles.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. Before we discuss a little bit on the green and the health, right? I just want to talk a little bit more about the tech sector, right? Because what you've kind of highlight, right? These things are very skilled. You're not gonna turn around in 2 years, right? If you position well, for some reason you join IS, because I think there was a period of time, maybe our time about a decade ago. IS is the people that cannot go to other sector, then they end up there. You want to join SMU? You take IS. Right? You want to join IS? For some reason, there'll be some people that ended up there and then they pursue strategically in the sector. Then eventually, when suddenly this thing pop up, they can pivot quite easily, right? But for the many others that are not deep technically trained, right, in these kind of sectors, right? What is there an opportunity? Like, what are we looking at?
No, I think absolutely. I think to be completely frank, I mean, my appraisal of technology skills in Southeast Asia, right? I think people tend not to look to this region outside of Singapore. Okay, let's put it this way. I think Southeast Asia as a region is up and coming when it comes to quality of talent, skills and whatnot, right? And that's thanks to the educational institutions. That's thanks to also the enablement of education beyond the traditional realm. So online right now, you can have access to a lot of tools to self-teach and all that, right? And whatnot. But I think the expectation tends to be for this region is more, okay, this is where we take proven concepts and we scale up and we replicate, clone, and then just do execution mode. So even within the technology space, right, skill spectrum, right, outside of Singapore, this is not really where a lot of the R&D happens, right? This is where a lot of the go-to-market, execution, scale-up happens, right? So that's one thing to say. Then the second thing I think to say is then when you talk about deep skills, if there's anywhere, got in Singapore. But that's no longer a Singapore talent or job market question. That is a global job market question. And Singapore, of course, is always positioning for that. The Singapore government is, in a way, very, very smart about this, right? So they want to position Singapore as the place where it's a global marketplace for this type of talents. And then they create the programs, the different passes and whatever incentives, right, to attract this type of talent.
I guess a lot of the questions also because right now, there are not a lot of courses that have been established and have been running for a long time for people to be skilled in this area. As what Reggie said, is a pivot, right? If you were lucky enough to be in those.
To be fair, these things are not like a course can settle one.
Yeah, it's going to take time for the schools to adapt as well.
To handle some of these higher complex. It's a STEM type of jobs, right?
It's more than that, bro.
Yeah. So no, as in when I say STEM, right, essentially means that your basics are not sorted. Right? You cannot go advanced one. There's no like halfway cut through. It's just very difficult. Yeah. Right. But there's a big truckload of people that are in like administrative work or like marketing or project management and all these things. Right. I think based on the data set that I saw in the MOM report, right, but 15% of people are in administrative and 10%. But all these people, like, there's a rising sector here, yes, but it's not going to be like a 2-year turnaround. Suddenly you become a data scientist. It's quite challenging. Yeah. But how do you kind of, is there like a position where you can enter that growing space? Or how
the answer is that you don't have to be a data scientist. That's, I guess, what I was trying to make in the first point, right? Yeah. So I think over here, a lot of the activity that happens in the region is, it's not the wear the white lab coat and all the stuff you watch in like Iron Man or whatever. It's not like that, right?
Not as cool,
it's not that, right? But it really is about like, okay, when something's been productized, right? Meaning, the intellectual property stuff has already happened already, and then it's basically, how do I take this to market? How do I run a project to test it out with the early adopters, for instance? How do I then communicate this in a way that users understand it. So there's a lot of jobs to be done downstream where this is concerned.
Got it.
Right? I mean, even you take something like ChatGPT, I mean, everyone now in the popular consciousness understands this from 12 months ago. But actually, it existed a long time ago.
Yes.
Right? It was only popularized because they came out and then they gave an interface to it that made it easy for everybody to understand. And
I guess there's a definitive question that a lot of people ask me, okay, which is, so I want to join this growth sector. Okay, let's say we call it growth sector. I want to join this growth sector. How much difference can I get in terms of a pay bump? How confident are we to say that this sector will be around to stay? Right. So there are a few assumptions in, of course, these questions. They are loaded, right? So yeah, based on these two questions, like maybe give us some color, like how much pay bump will I get? If let's say now I work in the bank, very comfortable, right? And then got this like ChatGPT thing kind of look for me, because I'm a very skilled project manager and they want to scale up quick, and they want me to jump. What is the bump that I'm expecting? And then of course, like what is the longevity of something like that? Or how should I reframe my mind?
I think the way I'll answer this is maybe, I don't want to crystal ball gaze too much because I think it hasn't reached us in the kind of magnitude or level that maybe your question seems to suggest, right? But I think a good reference point is if you go back to just about 18 months ago and what was happening in just even very base level software engineering jobs, right? In Singapore. And 18 months ago, before the interest rate environment started to completely go topsy-turvy and change, we were looking at essentially every time a software engineer would change their job, it would be about 30% pay bumps. Right? That was when everything was super hot. Right? And then equally to your second question, the longevity of that, right? How long did that last for? Right? Actually, the last time round, it lasted for quite a long time. It was, I think, probably about 4 or 5 years. And because we were in a very, very protracted cycle of very low interest rate environment. Okay. Now, if we look back in the precedents, that's what it would suggest. But I don't want to crystal ball gaze because you could also say that it was a bit unusual. The conventional wisdom previously was that your financial, your economic cycles is 8 to 10 years. Or, every time 8 to 10 years, it will flip.
Yep.
But actually, if you rewind the clock 18 months ago, right, it was a very, very, if you zoom out far enough, you'll see it's actually a fairly protracted cycle that goes all the way back to 2008 after the GFC, right? And why was that the case was because actually, even with the initial wave of COVID, right, there was a lot of stimulus that was being pumped in by the central banks and the governments. So it created a very protracted low interest rate environment. So if you really took the last one as a reference point, I'm not sure how accurate that is, to be honest. It was almost like, from 2008 till 22, it was a good run. It's a bit too long. It's a bit too long.
Those days are over.
Then you buy 2 property, then now you stuck with it. Stress.
Now stress can make loan repayment.
Then she back with the parent, right? She back with the parent.
So I actually would say, I think, prudently, I think we should look, of course, when there's good times, we celebrate. But equally, when there's bad times, right, we also must look at things in perspective. Right? So when you talk about pay bump, of course, by all means, pay bump. But if it cuts short sooner than you think or you expect, it's maybe more of a normalization than it is a very grossly negative thing.
I guess like one of my questions, right, and diving deeper into this, little bit of, we've got a lot of administrative, a lot of other people that are wanting to go into, let's just say, the tech space, right? Because there's been really
like do non-tech jobs in the tech space, right?
Correct, right? Like personally, when you're dealing with tech companies, as I'm sure you have been for the last 10, 12, whichever years, like how do they look from their lens, right? Because as people, as listeners want to go into that space, they also need to understand what they are looking for, so that what say the tech companies are looking for, so that we can know how to portray ourselves. Because from what I understand, they're always looking at previous tech experience. They're always looking at something in this sort of space where it's transferable. I mean, all of these are growth mindset, culture fit, you name it, right?
Like they don't want the auntie to work for them,
correct, right?
So
and
let's put it this way.
If a tech person, like if I were to apply for a tech space and I'm in construction, like what would a recruiter think? You know what I mean?
First of all, I think we need to separate pure tech companies and companies which are
seriously in tech.
Well, there are pure tech companies, and then there are companies which are sort of like using tech in the way they work. Right? What is the difference? This one a bit controversial.
Okay. Where's
Google?
Google?
I love controversial.
Where's Google?
Google is pure tech, in my view.
Okay.
Clearly, right?
Okay.
But where's Grab, for example, right? Is Grab ComfortDelGro, a version of ComfortDelGro that's using a lot more tech, for instance. Okay, this one I don't know, right? I mean, debatable, right? So, so that's kind of like, I think there's a spectrum of these things, right?
Okay.
I think pure tech companies actually, in the way we use that phrase today. Oh, sorry, and then I should also differentiate, right? And then there's also like those IT solution providers that started business maybe 20, 25 years ago. There are a lot of these guys out there, small shops. Versus a Google. How do you place them? You put them in the same category or you don't? I actually think in the kind of question that you're alluding to, you're talking about culture, perception, and kind of thing, it's quite different. And maybe the commonalities less right. They lie less in the sense that it's all under this broad technology banner. They're more under whether today we're talking about companies which were started in the last maybe 5 to 10 years with the intent of using manners of digital methodologies to sell, to market, run their operations versus companies which were maybe set up more than 10 years ago that inhabited a different mind space. Okay. So I think it's a bit more that you're looking for. Sure. Now, to answer that question in that framing, I think it is true that I think newer and younger companies in the last 5 to 10 years or so, which are set up for a digital view of things, right? That means I no longer set up the information and data that my organization or business collects on paper. I now put it at least on a spreadsheet, right? I now no longer run my marketing purely on the traditional old media channels of TV, print, or
cinema.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the one right now. Yeah. And the companies who are like that, then obviously I think the first thing that happens is, do you have the skills lah, right? If you're a marketer and you only know how to operate with media buying on print and all that, then you need to maybe review a bit lah, you need to upgrade, change, and learn the new methods of how to operate on search, how to operate on socials, even this, right? I mean, you need to know how to work with influencers. So that's changed. That's a skills or requirement shift that's happened. Culturally, is there a shift? Yes, I think in the last 5 to 10 years, these younger or newer companies also start to have these certain ideas, right? Why? Because they were
DEI, sustainable. Yeah, let's just call it out.
Correct.
Yes,
but very much influenced by internet companies, right? They're influenced by
yes.
this internet age of tech companies from the West, right? From Silicon Valley and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
And then a lot of those practices are imported, and then of course they'll look. And I mean, just to contest the earlier statement that they will not hire aunties, it's not true. I think they will hire the auntie.
They hire high-tech aunties.
Auntie. Where the sunglasses? Bro,
exactly. The skills
I just
fit.
came from the market.
Yeah, skills fit, culture fit, then okay lah. Yeah. But they'll privilege those things lah. That's one thing. They'll privilege culture fit a lot. I think because that's something that is very much influenced by this idea that we've taken from internet companies.
Fair. So that is the tech, which I think, we spent a lot of time talking about the tech space and whether is it tech jobs, non-tech jobs, because I think a lot of people perceive that these are the places that are gonna like give you the good range.
It's a growth sector, right? I mean, the reality is that I think more broadly,
or was it right? Like, was a growth sector? Is it still
honestly,
now?
I think it still is. I think this is not going to go away, right? I think it's fun. The internet, first of all, has fundamentally changed the way we live and work. That happened about, 30 years ago in its very beginning. Social media came in about, 20 years ago? Today, you're inhabiting, all these new buzzwords, right? You've got, we already talked about AI, prior to this, there was things of like Web3 and blockchain and whatnot. It's another wave that's happening. So, things have fundamentally shifted and they will continue to shift. So, I think it is a growth sector. Okay. I mean, the nature and the texture of what's beneath that broad technology banner, as we just said, the skills and what's required will shift. So, but does it actually undermine the fact that technology will drive growth? No, it won't. I think that will continue to happen. And because of that, businesses will grow, industry will grow, and the market will be there.
Interesting.
That sounds about the tech part. So for someone who wants to enter the tech side of things, but may not have been as skilled, they're not like a data, like they don't get to work with all these tools, or maybe they want to get into AI since that's the next big thing. But they studied, let's say, business or marketing or psychology.
Why you study business?
Right?
Then you study
So
one, right?
totally
Come out,
no
you can
link.
do.
What would your advice be
That's
for
me,
them
that's me. I
Go
studied
into
arts.
sales.
Yeah.
Go into sales.
Yeah,
What if they're not a
Psychology,
salesperson then?
But you study psychology, you study business, you study like
Maybe
technically.
they study literature.
Oh, okay.
It's fine. Honestly, I think it's less about what you studied.
What do you study?
I studied politics, so it has nothing to do with what I do today. But I think, to borrow yet another internet company phrase, stay hungry, stay foolish, right? Because you have to keep learning.
Kudos if you recognize who said that.
Yeah.
If you don't, then maybe you shouldn't join tech.
It's fine. Guy is not God. Okay. Yes.
No, but I think it's about that curiosity and that humility that we don't we have to keep learning and keep growing, and that curiosity will keep reading and stuff. I mean, I honestly, I'm not a techie. Like, you could you asked me more than 5 minutes to talk about AI. I probably couldn't get into the technicalities of it. But we need to know, at least at the surface level, what does this actually mean for society? What does this mean for businesses? What does this mean for people and their lives? And then you kind of understand the implications, and you have to think about it. And if you think about it, maintain a curiosity, you speak to other people to learn more about it, you read more about it, then the possibilities will be there. Whether if you're keen on writing, maybe you'll be a copywriter, maybe you'll be in the communication space. If you're keen on talking, maybe you'll be a sales guy. You'll be a good sales guy.
Yeah.
Talking and listening, both.
course,
Okay, good salespeople will be good listeners. So it really depends on your skills and where the fit and your personality fit lands you. And I don't think it necessarily always means that you have to be a techie.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying Wise and Shine so far. I'm your host Reggie, aka your Chief Financial Coconut, and for us to continue to do this show so that you become a tad bit wiser every week, you gotta like, share, subscribe, help us beat the algorithm. But even more importantly, if you can, comment in the comment section below. Let us know your thoughts and also some questions that you would love us to answer. Yep, now back to the show.
Many a time, these jobs descriptions, when we see whether it's on Glints or any other portal like LinkedIn, right, they often come with the criteria that says must have prior experience in tech. So for someone who doesn't but wants to make that shift, right, how many, like if we talk data, how many percent, or do you have a rough sense of how many people actually did not come from a tech background but were successfully able to cross this hurdle and enter the tech world?
I would say that in most instances today, that doesn't even show up as a problem, because the reality is that a lot of businesses, by default of the last 10 years, have had to adapt or adopt some way of digital methods. I mean, what business does not, for example, market online today? I struggle to think of one. And if you are working for that sort of business, maybe you should be thinking first of, maybe to answer the question there more directly is, I think it's not that difficult today to then start working on whether it's a side gig or maybe a short project stint or something like that, to just give yourself that exposure. I don't think people are saying, when it says prior means that you have to have worked for Google. It's not that. That's not what it means. I think what they're simply looking for is, do you understand what we mean when we say SEO, right? Do you understand what we mean when we say social media, right? The barrier actually isn't that high if you are with the times. Yeah.
So let's say someone comes from Sembcorp Marine.
Not from the times.
Or like from a really old school industry, a really old school company. Okay. And they want to enter like the Salesforce, the Google, the Microsoft.
Again, I would challenge the idea that there are really such industries today that do not use any such methods, right? And then I think the other thing is then, if they don't, maybe it is befitting of their industry, right? So maybe there are certain industries today where maybe deals are still just settled with high touch, right? And all that.
Correct.
And that's fine. Right, because that's also still a valued skill. That's not going to go away. There's a reason why certain markets and certain industries still operate in that format.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, even if you take a look at, say, the construction industry in Singapore, right? Technically, you can say they're a little behind in terms of tech, But they are actually, from my knowledge, right, speaking with a few of them, they are looking at ways to actually implement all of this already.
Exactly.
So yes, they may be coming from somewhere that hasn't used it, but in the next few years, it's going to happen.
Fair.
So if we were to get people to rethink their demands and aspirations, instead of them thinking, I want to go and join the Googles, the Microsoft, the Tesla, now we reframe that to maybe you can take on a tech transformation role, sales role, communications role, whatever role, in a firm that is in that process of transformation.
Exactly.
But then the next question would be, then who pays better? Of course, it all comes down to the money, right? Of course, it will be the big boys.
No, but the idea
but how
here is
big
that-
will be the difference in order for them to
No, I
still
think
do
the idea, the better question is, right, can you sidestep and then enter the big boys, right? Because I think that's what a lot of people I've seen do, right? So they do a sidestep, like maybe they were traditionally in like, let's say banking. Like I do have a lot of banking friends, right? Then sometimes the process is a bit old and they want to join a fast growing sector. Nobody wants to take them. Then they sidestep into a smaller company that does not have the capability to hire the top talent.
Yeah.
You have to work within it, right? So my budget is only 5,000, 6,000. I cannot hire that top guy, right? Then I have to find like amongst the B-listers, right? Who can I take? Then you sidestep into them, you join them. A year later, you turn around,
It's a springboard.
Use it as a stepping stone.
So I think that's the reality, right? It's crazy to believe that you can leave a so-called old sector and then just join the leading companies immediately. I feel like that's the...
Not completely crazy also. Like I said, there are some skills which are still transferable. I mean, the example they just gave around going from banks to, let's say, Google. For example, the big tech companies, the FAANG companies are all trying to sell cloud. Right? Google Cloud is a big sale. Microsoft is selling Azure. Who do they sell to? They sell to very large enterprises. Guess who has the best relationships in those? The bankers.
Yeah. So enough of the tech discussion. The world is not just tech. Yes. So what else? What else? You talk a little bit about green.
Sustainability.
Let's go into green.
All that. Maybe we can highlight a little bit like in terms of career for like 2024 landscape. Like what about the other sectors?
Yeah, I think those are the industry headlines as to the big sectors. I think as usual, there is the hardcore engineering front. So there'll be some demand for that. But I don't think there'll be a big explosion of that because again of how this region is actually positioned in the big or grander scheme of things. What I do think will be relevant is again, if you have business, then you go sell, right? So then I think sales, marketing tends to be usually in the leading indicator of things, right? It will come in. And then from there, you'll have more the generalist roles. Your general managers, your project managers will come up. And then with that, you'll then have the back end will then follow, which is your HR, finance, your admin, and type of roles. So that's usually the sequence.
Nice.
Right? In this part of the world, I think. And under those big industry banners of like, I think green tech, not tech, but just green, and then health.
Why is just green?
Just green, like renewables.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Companies are now moving into sustainability reporting.
Yeah.
So that's also another area.
Very fluffy,
Singapore is a very and what's the goal? To reach our goals by
2025, was it?
No, I think it'll be longer than that.
30,
30 or 40, right?
30.
No, but if you look at like say SP app or something, right, they're already trying to get you more and more green, right? As you pay your electricity bill.
Yeah, so it's a very big thing, right? And there's a big framework. There's a 2030. We can say it's far away, but it's not that far away.
No.
Yeah, it's really not that far away. So the clock is ticking, and because of the framework and the goals and the commitment that Singapore has made to hit its goals, you'll see a lot of, again, once the flag is planted already, then there will be a lot of downstream stuff, and businesses and organizations will reposition themselves. Yeah. And then you'll have or what I just mentioned. So
yeah, I know. I made a lot of hate of sustainability. I said, what the hell do you do, right?
Taxation, reduce tax.
Head of sustainability, that's on me.
Got a lot. I mean, because sustainability, okay, when you mentioned ESG positioning or reporting, for example, right? The truth is that a lot of this is also about how to deal with the compliance requirement and how to report. So there's a lot of engineering, let's call it that way. Yeah.
No, but I think that's a really good point in terms you brought up. Like I think 2030, Singapore itself is going to build out X number of superchargers along Singapore, so and so forth. That's great. But when you deep dive into it, like you need infrastructure, you need logistical analysis. Like it's technically a non-green space. Yeah. In order to build out a green system, because you cannot run away from logistics, you cannot run away from infrastructure building, right?
What about the heal sector, right? The healing. It's a big thing.
It's growing quite fast. It's growing very fast.
I think absolutely. I think that one. I think basically there's a lot more consciousness into. It's not just this one. There's some industry jargon around this lah. I'm not super on top of it, but it's moving away from just the treatment and things. It's into more preventative, right? And then more into like living a good life, that kind of thing.
Well-being.
Yeah, well-being, right?
Well-being.
So it's not lifespan, but let's say health span, that kind of, those kind of concepts and ideas.
Yeah.
It's really, really coming out a lot. So again, that will then breed all the spillovers, right? Because it always starts with a macro, and then that's when the capital and the money will flow. And when the capital and money flows there, then downstream you'll have the businesses and organizations which are set up to mobilize on the capital.
Yeah.
This is a good point, right? In my case this year, like I sell to SAARC, right? South Asia countries. And Ayurvedic spas are very old school, right? In that sense, right? Because they have doctors and they have, priests and everything.
You're selling to them?
But now they're looking at ways to market it out. So they're looking at digital ways specifically to market out to the rest of the world to come to their spa in India or wherever, right?
Nice,
and I think like that for me, that was transformational. Like you never would have thought it.
There's a lot of consciousness around this right now. I mean, there's also this like rise of things like plant-based diets and whatnot. And then recently, I think Singapore, that Netflix documentary being called out a blue zone for longevity and all that. It's very, very top of mind.
Let's talk about the competitiveness versus where the locals stand. So one thing we covered in Forward Singapore was that a lot of us locals are losing on these opportunities to foreigners because the companies don't think that the local population has the skill set. So we are being delegated to certain jobs and not to like the really high skill, high pay, which goes to the outsiders instead. From your data that you have been handling, do you see this happening as well? That most Singaporeans are being placed in all these generalist roles rather than the high level being primed and groomed for leadership roles?
I think my data is not so specific to that extent, but what I would say is that I think it's all just time framing. I think, and whether it's this sector today or another sector that was booming maybe or very hot 30 years ago, if we just reverse, it's just the whole thing plays itself out again and again, right? Maybe 30 years ago, it was about the financial services industries and whatnot, right? And then a statement like that might have been made. But then today, if you look at the highest ranking executives, I think you'll see a good mix of Singaporeans are very well represented and whatnot, right? So I think it's just about time framing, and I think I think Singapore has amazing talent. I think Singaporeans are very, very capable, and structurally, even if we're not well positioned in a certain sector today, it's just a matter of time before our systems and institutions will produce the necessary skill sets and profiles.
I think senior exec is a different discussion. Because senior exec is very specific to the individual. Right? But we talk about like mid-management, I think there's a lot to be discussed. And I think recently some of the permits have adjusted in price. 不一样 price now, right? So you're on some level you're disturbing the market, right? Trying to set peg a new price, for I think S-Pass.
EP also, right?
EP also, yeah. So I think that kind of affects does it affect the hiring propensity, like
or do they just pay more?
Do you have any insights
It's a
on
business
that?
cost.
No, I think this one, I honestly don't have enough data or perspective on this, so I can't really comment that directly on it. What I would simply say is that I think businesses over here, Singaporeans in general, I go out there, I market Singaporeans not just to Singapore-based businesses, I market Singaporeans to businesses from outside looking at coming into the region. Singaporeans are very highly rated.
Well, then maybe are there certain sectors that you think potentially, in the next few years, maybe not next year, right? We crystal gaze a bit, right? In the next few years, will be a bit challenging, and maybe now some of our listeners can look to, position out to some of these growth sectors, because it looks like these other sectors will shrink a little bit.
It has more to do with, we have to watch how Singapore positions its economy relative to the broader, to the world, right? I mean, in the end, we are all part of a global marketplace, so to speak. So I think the more challenging aspects, I mean, Singapore is ultimately a hub and it's a service economy in many ways. A lot of the industries which are positioned for that, professional services, high-end manufacturing, value add on oil and gas and all that. All that will continue to thrive because of those very intrinsic factors. And conversely, the reverse of that would be if you're not part of a business that is positioned for international or regional hubbing and or a service economy, then you fall out of that. Right, so that will be more challenging.
So you think manufacturing and engineering will not go further?
No, I think high-end manufacturing for sure.
Okay, so high-end
for
specific.
sure. Yeah. So it's not about manufacturing. I think will always be a big part of Singapore, but in different aspects, different nuances.
Proportion, different. Okay.
Yeah. So the value proposition is different, right? It's I mean, for the longest time already, it's not about Singapore is not low cost manufacturing. No. It's not about that.
It's about ease of transport, reliability of water and electricity.
Yeah, so those things are
especially
are there,
water.
Right?
Water is very important in manufacturing.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And then now we have also things like, we have data center infrastructures and all that, right?
Yeah. The internet exchange of the region.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. So all those things are fantastic, right?
Reduce latency, right? All those things. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it won't go away. But I think it's entirely this idea, like where are you positioned relative to Singapore's value prop, right? Value prop is as we are a hub. We are services, right? So
why are you not here?
Yeah,
right?
are you part of that or not? So I think that there's some very, very small scale businesses. A lot of this small time craftsmen and all that, they'll struggle, if you're old school. And then the new school type of craftsman, it exists because you're charging a super premium, and you're existing that, then it becomes more of a lifestyle product.
I know.
It's no longer.
I've seen those.
So there is that also, right? But that exists because it is a beneficiary of the economy flows downstream, right? Because of the success of the hub and the service economy, then there's spending power, consumption power to spend on high-end craftsmen, right?
Yeah,
for example.
I get it.
Right.
One last thing, right? Like he talked about the industries you want to move away from. What about the industries you want to move to and position yourselves for it?
Like, I think you really shared
I already mentioned
the three sectors.
Like, like tech and so on. But if you take a look at tech, because I think most of our listeners are looking to go into tech, like, do you have certain like areas or certain industries in tech that you think would be a good one? For example, say cybersecurity or something like along these lines.
I think there are definitely some themes which are quite big. I mean, cybersecurity is a very big sub-theme. Right, for instance, I think again AI is a very big buzzy word.
A lot of fluff. A lot of fluff means a lot of wastage.
Foundation
if you can
layer,
join, you get a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, not application layer, but foundation layer.
Pharma. I'm just thinking out loud that pharma should have also quite a lot, because if you talk about like the positioning that Singapore's taking, we're also trying to attract all these big pharma R&D, right? So there should be some opportunities for people to shift into those growth areas too.
Insights from some friends. All these R&D are shifting out. Singapore too expensive.
Challenging.
Really? For pharma.
Yeah, I think challenging.
And especially now we have a few things to try to regulate the prices that pharma can charge. A lot of them are feeling like it's no longer worthy to be here.
So are you then seeing that in pharma and biotech and all these, like the biological sciences area, that demand for the jobs have dropped and you don't really see that as a growth area?
It's a fluke lah. Time to code lah.
No. I think what
cancer.
I think where there's potential is again, Southeast Asia as a growing market of buyers, market of users, right? Right, because again, Southeast Asia, one of the things about this region is there's a very fast growing middle class. In Singapore, we don't see and feel it as acutely, but you only have to look across the borders to see it. And it's happening very, very quickly. Yeah. And Singapore, again, is a hub for the region. So the nature of the jobs, right, even if R&D is moving out because Singapore is too expensive, right, potentially, the job demands will shift. The positioning will shift. That's because we're also beneficiaries of the region.
Yes, so we must never forget we are part of the region. Don't always travel to England, whatever. Learn to travel around the region. There's a lot of things to look for, a lot of opportunities. Okay, fair. Maybe last question for you, right? Because I think a lot of listeners would have gone through this, right? Maybe in this year or the year before, retrenchment, right? So like over a course of like 2 retrenchment exercise, then you're the lucky one. You still here, right? What will your advice be, right? You are the survivor. You survived 3 round retrenchment, right? But things are not great, right? So would you advise the listener to say like, okay, you survive, but don't stay lah. Maybe you can go somewhere else, or like what would the advice be?
Oh, okay, I get what you mean.
I would advise. I think most people think about and evaluate their current situation in a job based on 3 factors lah. Number 1, can I continue to earn money? Number 2, can I have prospects to advance within this organization, better my career? And then the third one is, will my company continue to also grow or perform well, right? Your question alludes more to the third question, like, or if I look at the
Turnaround story need time,
Yeah, that kind
now
of
it's
things.
a downtrend on this thing.
Yeah.
I survive.
Correct. So my advice would be less to judge an organization or your employer simply on the basis of they've run one or two maybe right-sizing exercises.
Right sizing. Wow.
Good way to put it. Great way to put
I borrowed
it.
that word from another show.
Yeah.
Right sizing. Yes.
But I would say maybe consider it from those three questions, right? Like ask yourself, like, in this job, right? The way you've been experiencing it, the way you've seen the environment change, all that. Is it still a place where you think that you can continue to do well in your job and create value and therefore be compensated for it? Second is this organization also one where you can continue to see prospects for your own growth, right? Can you move and advance? And third one, when you evaluate your company's own performance and status situation, look at it more broadly and consider the factors of whether a company can do well, not just survive, but do well. Sometimes it is precisely because they went through the exercise.
Lighter.
That they are probably in a better situation to do well going ahead.
Okay.
Right? So you need to have that perspective.
Okay, fair. That's good. Thanks for sharing, right? And I hope you all enjoyed. Hopefully this year is a better year for your career.
Yeah.
If you have any questions, you can always email us and then we can take it from there. Okay. Any last things you want to add about career?
No, I think that's useful. I think one of the biggest takeaway I had from this discussion is that instead of everyone just looking at, I want to join the big boys. You brought up a very interesting point. Maybe look at other companies that are not really tech, but need the tech assistance to help them digitalize and transform. And in doing so, that could also be an added boost for their career, because imagine then using that as your portfolio to say, I helped this old school company go from old school to modern.
New school.
Maybe not so new, but modern, right? Not far
newer
behind.
school.
Yeah, newer.
And it's true because a lot of these also they as lost as
Yeah,
you,
exactly.
You go in, you know a bit. It's like, whoa, like cool.
Exactly. So the competition is also a bit lesser there.
yeah,
I think that was a very interesting takeaway. So if you guys have been trying to get a job in tech, but you have been saddened by this tech winter, that's actually a really good perspective to think about.
Yeah.
I
And
think-
also the fast growing startups, like the scale ups. Like if you write them for 2 or 3 years, suddenly they become the big boys in the game. Suddenly you join a reputable company. Actually, 3 years ago, they
were
just
nobody.
closed me only, right?
Kucing kurang lah.
Kucing kurang, right? Yeah. But times have
Yeah,
changed. Changed.
exactly.
Okay, cool.
I think one thing I'm taking away from this is how when we plan our career, right, we always say what's next. But really we should be thinking 5 steps down the line.
Yeah.
So if we can't get now to that company that we want to go because of tech winter, so on and so forth, how do we plan and execute our move so that we're ending up there in X number of years?
I think that's excellent. Yeah, I think it always pays off to at least have an idea of what's your end game. Even though it's that end game, not like not 25 years in the future, but 5 years in the future, if you kind of have a sense of what you want to work towards, and then you consider your own prospects, right? I mean, even that question earlier about how do you consider your current situation? Do you move on or not? Right? And those 3 questions that I've outlined, it really is about like thinking, does this help me get to? Is this still the place I want to be at to get me to my goals? I think it's important to have goals. Yeah.
Absolutely. Cool.
Nice. Okay, so that's it. We'll see you next week. Take care, guys. Bye.
Thanks, guys.